this point onwards, we will know whether
the next generation, your children and grandchildren, do better.
Hardships, sleeping in corridors, and then going out again.
This, the capital of Senegal and the heart of Dakar. It's business back as usual. The aftermath of elections where people had at some point in time feared that the elections may not hold. The elections came and were held peacefully. This is Peterson at some few meters from Avenue Ponte. This street, together with a number of streets, were clogged with protesters prior to the election demanding that President Abdoulaye Wade does not contest the election. Well, the election went on, and of course we know the aftermath and the results thereafter. This is Global Perspectives, and I am Aurora Obo. See you after the break.
The elections in Senegal were significant and important to 14 million Senegalese in the West African sub-region. From independence till date, the French-speaking West African country had never experienced a military takeover like nearly all its neighbors. But on the eve of the election, emotions boiled and poured all over Senegal. Avenue Ponte in the center of Dakar was the heart of civil society and the opposition protests. Young musicians and professionals joined the fray, piling on the pressure on President Wade day in and out. The message was the same: the incumbent must not have his way in by force. The opposition in the beginning appeared divided. At least 4 of the presidential candidates were former prime ministers to President Abdoulaye Wade. It was even whispered in corridors of power that many could not be relied upon when push came to shove. But it was inevitable that at some point the opposition would come together. The M23 group provided the rallying point for the opposition. For days on end, the group rallied thousands of people, all of them protesting against President Wade's decision to contest in the poll.
This is why I'm here, like everybody over here. I don't have a political party, I don't belong to any political party, but I'm a Senegalese citizen who tries to defend his constitution, and I'm ready to die to defend my constitution. One thing is clear, sir. If we let him go to the election, for sure, 100% he will win. Like Bagbo say, I'm going to win or I'm going to win. So there is no doubt if we let him go, it's gone. It's gone for Senegal.
Abdoulaye Wade had gone at Libya and Benghazi to say to Gaddafi to leave the power because people don't like him. And now people don't like Abdoulaye Wade, so he must go on and let Senegal be.
The plot for the protesters was straightforward, with different subplots. With every passing day, it became obvious that the opposition would not be putting forward a single candidate to take on President Wade in the first round. One of the most interesting subplots had all to do with what the candidates did in the run-up to the poll. At least 5 candidates took turns to rile the crowds in Avenue Ponte, while the most assured candidates hit the campaign trail. Talks of a boycott never entered the discussions of the opposition.
Cannot have a full unity throughout a country. I know Senegal is a small country for you, but for us it is a big country, and it is quite normal that one or two candidates from the opposition try to go for themselves. But I can assure you that the majority of the candidates from the opposition are opposed to this election.
"85-year-old Abdoulaye Wade had spent more than 20 years in the opposition. Senegal's founding father and leader, Léopold Senghor, had infamously named him the heir because of his cunning nature. Even though he was constantly warring with Senghor and his successor, Abdou Diouf, he still took time out to take part in Diouf's government at certain points in time. He will later admit that he left President Diouf's government because he was not doing anything. When President Wade defeated Abdou Diouf in a runoff poll in 2000, he put an end to a limitless tenure for the presidency and then reduced a single term from 7 years in office to 5 years. But President Wade was not called the heir for nothing. He argued that the constitutional amendment only took effect at the end of his first tenure in 2007. In other words, he had only done a single term of 5 years by 2012. Senegal's constitutional court agreed with President Wade, and his supporters danced gleefully on the streets. But in the capital, Dakar, there was mayhem. Civil society groups and local reporters alleged that at least 10 people died in the aftermath of that decision in January this year. The protest and the bad press did little to change Abdoulaye Wade's mind. Rather, it simply bolstered it. In his many years of politics, there was very little anyone could do about Abdoulaye Wade's stubborn streak.
Senegal's President Abdoulaye Wade and Nigeria's former President Olusegun Obasanjo, who is the chief AU and ECOWAS electoral observer, have an uncanny relationship. In 2006, in the heat of President Obasanjo's third term bid, President Wade advised President Obasanjo not to go for a third term. 4 years later, President Obasanjo was in Dakar celebrating President Wade's African Renaissance statue, a controversial project where President Wade gets to accrue 33% of revenue that comes from that statue. The irony of it all is that President Obasanjo is back in this country and is advising President Wade not to go for a third term. He's having to eat his own pie.
It was no accident that ECOWAS and the African Union appointed a single electoral observer for the election. Former President Olusegun Obasanjo was well known to former President Diouf as well as Abdoulaye Wade. His job was simple: ensure that the polls are held without any incidents and broker peace among the different warring interests. This was by no means a difficult job. Local reports had spoken of a stiff meeting between both men only hours after President Obasanjo's arrival. In and out, they entered the Radisson Blu Hotel in Dakar to hold last-minute negotiations with President Obasanjo. Some willingly spoke.
Les médiateurs insistent sur la transparence de l'élection. C'est fondamental. Si l'élection est transparente, les Sénégalais ne voulant plus qu'il y ait prolongation des mandats du président de la République.
While others simply walked away.
What are you concerned about? Do you want to elaborate?
The leader of the M23 group had stopped the street protests, but then he added more drama to this political crisis.
The proposal is, first of all, to postpone this election for 6 or 9 months. For this time, we can set up very credible institutions, democratic institutions like comment on dit encore, Cour constitutionnelle, Constitutional Court.
Hours later, Mr. Obasanjo was ready to brief an anxious crowd of local and international journalists, but not before some more drama. But then there was more heat for the AU ECOWAS chief electoral observer. His negotiations had resulted in a peculiar solution, where still the elections were only hours away.
The opposition have talked of 9 months, and they put that in writing. So we are just midwife, and we say, okay, if one talk of 3 years and another talk of 1 year, thereabout, what do you start? So, and if those who are talking of it know how they work down.
Mr. President, do the...
The morning of Sunday the 26th of February, Mr. Obasanjo was one of the earliest scholars at the French Arabic school in Dakar. The polling unit Abdoulaye Wade usually voted. There was no sign of embarrassment from the previous day's events. All everyone could do was to wait with fingers crossed for the close of voting.
So far, I pray and hope that what we have seen in the 2 locations that we have visited here in Dakar will be replicated throughout the country in every polling station. If that is done, I believe that we are moving towards a peaceful and orderly election.
This was his first public appearance in Dakar in nearly 2 weeks. It was also important that he posted a favorable score in Dakar, even though his son Karim Wade was roundly defeated in mayoral polls a year earlier. As he went past the throng of his supporters at his polling unit, he whispered to them, "Say change instead of you have won." Confidently, he strode in to cast his vote. But then the jeers had already begun, unnoticed by President Wade. The overwhelming crowd chanted, "Old man, go home." As he walked out, he shoved aside a security aide as the media sought to get a word from him, but there was none forthcoming. Abdoulaye Wade was mute, a very rare moment in his political career. The incident at the Arabic school had made a lasting and deep impression. This wasn't going to be as easy as he had thought. "24 hours later, with less than 30% of the results out, President Abdoulaye Wade addressed a plethora of journalists. He trudged on, chaperoned by his aides, into a hall at the presidential villa. Not a few journalists fathomed President Wade was going to step in. The body language of President Wade was different from the past. Gone was the confident talk and arrogance. The Senegalese often said President Wade never used notes whenever he addressed his countrymen. This time around, he hardly lifted his head from the sheets on the table.
Sur 551, soit la moitié, me classe en tête avec 32,17%. C'est 25%, 25,24% au mot suivant. Tout est donc encore possible, victoire ou second tour. Dans la perspective d'un second tour, le PDS et ses alliés, dont le candidat reste en tête de la compétition, vont naturellement explorer toutes les possibilités d'entente avec d'autres forces politiques, selon des modalités à convenir ensemble pour élargir notre électorat et nous attirer.
The camera lenses had moved away quickly to Macky Sall. He was the man of the moment. The former Prime Minister to Abdoulaye Wade for 3 years was the reason the polls were headed for a second round. President Wade had once referred to him as his best political student, but Wade gave him the kick and the cold shoulder when Macky Sall summoned his son Karim over the management of funds donated by the Organization of Islamic Countries. Macky Sall formed his political party and toured Senegal twice in 2 years, carrying out a vigorous campaign. He was a workaholic and hardly ever smiled. At 50, he was 35 years younger than the incumbent. Macky Sall had threatened to repay President Wade in his own coins, and he had done just exactly that.
Autre a ramené la durée du mandat du président de la République à 5 ans, renouvelable une seule fois et renouvelable une seule fois. Et là, je voudrais dire que je m'appliquerai cette réforme. Ça veut dire que si je suis élu pour 5 ans, je m'engage à n'exercer qu'un mandat de 5 ans. Donc le président a le...
The strategy ahead of the March 25th runoff poll for President Wade relied on old tricks, a little bit of convincing arguments, and perhaps a bit of luck from his retinue of marabouts.
Tout le monde comprendra que c'est possible. Je vous ai dit que les projets, et même les projets que je vous montrerai une prochaine fois, ce n'est pas des projets même bien faits, dont on va chercher le financement. C'est que les financements, nous les avons. Mais ce n'est pas encore construit. L'immeuble de New York, on a les financements. C'est une simple question de temps. Mais ça, c'est le temps de construction de 18 mois. Donc, ça ne demande pas beaucoup de temps. 18 mois, ça sera complet, ça sera fait.
This time when he voted, the French Arabic school was without the jeers and chants of nearly a month ago. His lieutenants had decided to get the right crowd into the polling unit. His supporters were optimistic of his chances. But Abdoulaye Wade was the man of high drama. The day wasn't done when Africa's second oldest leader placed a phone call to his opponent. It was an acceptance of defeat and a prayer for Senegal's new president. Indeed, the curtain had fallen on Abdoulaye Wade and the beginning of a new era ushered in. Macky Sall was ready to do his lap dance.
Aux allures de plébiscite, exprime l'immensité des attentes des populations.
j'en prends toute la mesure. Ce soir, une ère nouvelle commence.
Aujourd'hui, c'est la victoire du peuple sénégalais et je suis très fier d'avoir joué une partition parce que je ne suis pas le seul.
On the streets of Dakar, the celebration had begun in earnest. The victory which had begun on the streets months ago through street protests had ended on the same streets. The coalition of opposition candidates had handed Macky Sall nearly 40% of votes, taking his total toll to 64%, while President Wade dropped from 37% to 34%. The lesson from the Senegalese election was poignant. If you push hard enough, you move a boulder.
Mamina wonde ya wonde, mamina wonde mana wonde sira, mamina wonde mana wonde. Luya mama, ya wayo ya mama, ya ala le fama tiara.
Whoa, on my way out. Look at that spectacle right behind me. It's beautiful. It's the African Renaissance statue. Now just hold it there for a moment. I mean, this statue is worth a whopping $50 million. You don't use your personal money to build stuff like this. I mean, if you had $50 million, you take care of schools, you take care of education, you take care of health, you build houses. You filled 1 million hungry people. But this is what President Abdoulaye Wade did with $50 million, money he got from certain anonymous Arab states. You know, there were protests, people said, we don't need to do this. But he went ahead and he did it. And then to add insult to injury, he claims 33% ownership of this statue, calling it intellectual property right. You see, African leaders don't just get it. They don't know how to quit. They don't know when to quit. In 2 years, he's not only lost ownership of this statue, he's also lost his seat. He can't even win a first round election. That's the big lesson here. You should know when to quit. You should know how to quit. You should know when to leave when the ovation is loudest. That's all we have time for on Global Perspective this week. I am Aogo Obo. See you again next time. And the security forces, this is how far they have come. From this point onwards, we will know whether...
The next generation, your children, grandchildren, do better.
Hardships, sleeping in corridors, and then going out again.